Hey everyone, welcome to Delays After Dark. I'm Ducky.
And I'm Orion, and we're so glad you could join us.
Before we dive in tonight, this is your trigger warning. This is quick heads up that tonight's episode discusses some pretty heavy topics such as abuse, violence, and other really sensitive topics. Just please take care while listening.
Tonight we're exploring the complex and very tragic case of Aileen Wuornos. Ducky, this is the one that really shows how important it is to understand the whole story, isn't it?
Absolutely. While Eileen became known for 7 murders she committed in Florida between the years of 1989 and 1990, her story really begins decades earlier.
Right. Let's start at the beginning. Aileen was born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, which is kind of funny. That's also the same name as a town not too far from where I reside in New York. And honestly, from day one, was incredibly difficult for her.
That's putting it mildly. Her father was in prison while she was born, and she never got to meet him. He later died by suicide while incarcerated.
Which is a dang shame. And her mother left when Aileen was just 4 years old, right?
Yes, she and her brother Keith were abandoned and left by their grandparents. Unfortunately, this wasn't a positive change for them. The household was incredibly abusive.
We seem to have a history of that. With our previous episode, we also had a grandparent that was in charge. The effects of this
Exactly.
started to show up pretty early as well. By age 11, Aileen was already engaging in dangerous behaviors just to survive. By 14 years old, she had a child after being assaulted, and the baby was taken from her and put up for adoption.
Yes, and at 15, she was homeless, sleeping in abandoned cars and in the woods near her home. Kind of weird she's homeless, but sleeping near her home, that's just what we found. Can you imagine being that young and having to survive like that?
It's absolutely heartbreaking. This is the point where we start to see how Eileen's early life trauma shaped the actions that she experienced and perpetrated later in her life. She turned to hitchhiking and petty crimes just to survive.
Yes, but let's not delve into her past too much. Let's fast forward to Florida in the late 1980s, where the series of murders began in 1989 and continued through 1990. I want to walk through the timeline, Orion?
The first victim, Richard Mallory, was a 51-year-old electronics store owner, and his body was found on December 13th of 1989 in a wooded area in Volusia County. He'd been shot multiple times.
Then, on June 1st, 1990, they found the body of David Spears, a 43-year-old construction worker in Citrus County. He was naked and had been shot 6 times.
Strangely enough, just a week later, Charles Karskaden was killed. He was 40 years old and a part-time rodeo worker, and his body was found in Pasco County on June 7th.
Yes. And the next victim was Peter Seams, a 65-year-old retired merchant seaman. Interestingly enough, his body was never found, but they discovered his abandoned car in Orange Springs, and a witness reported seeing Eileen and her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, leaving the car.
There's a lot of speculation about that one as well. Following that situation, and no ties or proof 100% as to whether or not it connected to Eileen, there was Troy Burris, who was 50, and he was a sausage salesman in Ocala. His body was found in August 1990 in Marion County.
Yes, and the next victim was Charles Humphrey. He went by Dick. I'm not sure where he got that. Probably Richard, his middle name. But he was the next victim. He was found in September 1990 in Marion County. He was a 56-year-old former state child abuse investigator who had been working as a part-time security guard.
And the final victim was Walter Gino Antonio, who was 62 years old. His body was discovered in November of 1990 in Dixie County. And like several of the others, he was found partially clothed and had been shot multiple times.
And then after all these murders, Eileen was eventually caught, and when she was caught, she claimed all of the killings were in self-defense. This actually raised some interesting questions about self-defense claims and how they're viewed by the justice system.
Absolutely. Touching on that a little bit for a second, Eileen claimed on multiple separate occasions that she was simply protecting herself, and this was a self-defense against sexual assault. She continued to claim on and on that these were sexual assault situations where she had to defend herself, even though she had a past history of prostitution. The evidence against her was pretty substantial. They found possessions that belonged from the victims in pawn shops, selling trophies. That's a pretty big guilt type of thing we got going on. And multiple witnesses had seen her with some of the men who were killed as Johns.
Yes, and the media coverage was extremely intense on this case. She was called America's first female serial killer, although that's not actually accurate. There had been others before her, which we'll probably see in later podcast episodes.
Which is great moving forward, because we definitely should touch on those so that we have a little bit of background to prove why she shouldn't technically be coined as the first female serial killer in America. Her time on death row was marked by some really interesting developments. She gave several different accounts of what happened, sometimes contradicting her earlier statements, which led her to be a completely unreliable self-witness.
Yes, and with the mismatch in stories and pretty much everything that happened, her mental state became a big topic of discussion, especially in her later interviews.
Absolutely. She wasn't really in a good headspace throughout the time that she was sitting on death row. And she actually sat there for quite some time. She was executed on October 9th of 2002. Since then, her case has been the subject of lots of different media. We're talking books, documentaries, movies. The most famous movie that covers her story is Monster, that was released in 2003.
Yes, and you know what I find the most important about this case is actually about how it highlights the impact of childhood trauma and how it can cause cycles of violence later in life and how it affects you as much as you grow up and it shapes the person that you become.
Absolutely. While nothing excuses taking another person's life, understanding these factors helps us to recognize warning signs and hopefully prevent future tragedies.
Yes. So, with that being said, we've discussed all the victims. What do you think about it? So, this is a pretty cut and dry case, pretty quick one, but what are your thoughts and opinions on the case?
So personally, I begin to wonder, because of the time period that Aileen grew up in, did she have access to people who cared about her enough to try to delve into what she was dealing with? Because from the outside, it looks like she really didn't have a support network or people who really cared about her. You know, the brother is only briefly mentioned, but you have to wonder if she was going through all this nonsense, you know, what happened to the younger brother along the way as well. And I know that's not an integral plot point to Eileen's story, but she is like the mother of one of the serious movements on social media in the last couple of years. You know, that song, Mama Said That It Was Okay. It became this whole huge situation where people were, they were posting Facebook posts, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube's, Twitter, which is now X, discussing the opportunity that they had to feel normal, to defend themselves against men who were treating them poorly. And that it was all based on Aileen Wuornos and how she portrayed herself and her situation with her case. That being said, all of her past history doesn't quite line up to, I dealt with X, Y, and Z, so I'm just going to start killing dudes while I have them as Johns, while they have appointments that they're paying for. It doesn't really make sense to say that she was in a situation where she was participating in prostitution and she was participating in selling her body for money, but then she turns around and says, oh, this was sexual assault. It kind of like, it doesn't conflate.
Yes, I think it seemed like from the moment she was old enough to really understand what's going on in the world, she was abandoned. And it's not entirely her fault, but she was completely abandoned by almost her entire family, which made her into the person that she was. And again, it doesn't excuse the murders, but it definitely puts it into light of how, whenever you are growing up, you see nothing but garbage people doing garbage things, and you believe that the whole world has turned its back on you, especially men from her point of view. So she was finding a way to take it out on the people she was feeling anger towards, which this case actually kind of reminds me of a case that we'll most likely get into in a different episode, but Jack the Ripper. his whole thing, that's one of the theories, is that that's why he took his anger out on prostitution, is because he himself was abused by his mother and had a really big disdain for her, so he took it out on women.
So you're basically what you're seeing as the connecting situation there is that, he had the opposite side of the situation from what Aileen had. Aileen had the situation where she was in a situation where she was kind of felt forced into prostitution so that she could keep her head above water and stay alive. Whereas on the other side of that, Jack the Ripper was basically a victim of his mother's prostitution.
Yes. Well, that the theory is that he was a victim of his mother's prostitution. I think that if she, actually, never mind. I'll ask this a question this way: do you think that if she had a support system, that she would have done it anyway?
Honestly, I feel like she still probably would have started at least harming some of her Johns, if not killing them. Because I feel like she had gotten to the point where she had so much anger and rage stored up in her body that even if she had had a support system along the way and then still somehow wound up in prostitution, she still would have gotten to a point where she was so angry at herself for needing to be in that situation and not being able to find another way, and angry at the people who came to her to pay for her body, basically portraying that the only worth that she had was between her legs.
Okay. But do you think that so obviously she killed 7 people, but do you think that she deserved lethal injection, or do you think she should have been able to plead insanity due to her long line of mental issues?
That is a really good question because I wonder if it would have mattered either way if she had pled insanity and she would have gotten help or been institutionalized at least for like 20 to 25 years. I don't know if that would have been enough for her. I feel like she was so deep into this victimization of self that I feel like she still would not have been able to bring herself back to the surface as a productive member of society. I feel like if she had gone and pled insanity and she had been allowed to make that plea, that she would have been stuck in an institution for the rest of her life. And I feel like she would have ended up killing again, honestly, inside the institution. I would worry that in that situation, she would be put with other people who have similar issues because, during those time frames, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the mental wards that we had available to us for hospitals and things like that, they were separated by types of mental health issues. So I feel like she would have been put into a situation where she was surrounded by people who dealt with the same types of victimization, and that would have led her to become violent towards the people who were trying to help her. What do you think?
So something I saw is that she actually said that it was whenever she heard that she was getting lethal injection, she said it was probably best because she would kill again. I do think that if we at least tried, because like we at least tried to understand Charles Manson, right? So especially with her being considered the first female serial killer, I think we should have tried to. I didn't look into a whole lot of that background. I'm not sure if the justice system tried, but I think we should have tried to put
There's
her in
definitely
some
more
type
that
of
could have been
institution.
done for her.
Yeah, like definitely try to put her into some sort of institution. That way we can at least understand why she did it. Because, like we said earlier, the childhood trauma, like this case really puts it into perspective of how it impacts you as an adult. So, if we were able to actually go through and not exactly study her like she's a lab rat, but sit there and like we did with Charles Manson, just ask him questions like, why are you doing it? Like, what's going on in your brain that's causing you to do what you're doing? But then again, if you've seen pictures of her, she was psychotic. So I definitely think
Especially towards the end there
yeah.
of her trial, she portrayed this person who was completely unreachable. She was closed off, and all she wanted everybody to hear was that, she killed these dudes because they were trying to assault her, and that she would do it again given the opportunity, which is a very scary thought. which leads me to a little bit of an understanding from the justice system's point of view as to why they would want to schedule her for lethal injection, knowing that she blatantly and openly said to them, if you give me the opportunity, I will most likely kill again.
Yeah, and I think that if she did end up killing again, I don't know if it'd be the same way. Because I don't know, she did all these killings in Florida. She was, you know, prostituting herself out. But I don't know. This case is really strange when you start to think about like the what ifs. Because
When
like,
you
what if
delve a
she
little
got
bit
help? What if
deeper,
like, yeah, more into like the psychology part of it. But I can't say that I understand it enough to really make a informed decision about what would happen if she did get the help.
I don't think she ever honestly would have been safe out in open society. Had she had help from the beginning, like way back when she first got into prostituting herself and getting money for her body when she was just a young teen girl, I feel like if she would have had intervention then, it could have been possible for her to lead at least a semi normal life. But then I would also be concerned. She had so much trauma in her very young childhood that we're looking at things like post traumatic stress, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder that could have made her still a violent person in her adult life.
Okay. And here's something I just thought of. Do you think her being a woman affected this at all? Because she, like we said, she had a brother that went through pretty similar things. Obviously, we don't see him like turning to prostitution or anything, but like he would have went through probably around the same shit that she was going through, right? So, do you think it was just her being born and that's just the way she reacted to it? And do you think her being a woman had anything to do with that? Or do you think it was just she wasn't genetically uh, as resilient as maybe some other people would be?
I do think that, excuse me, think that there is an entire whole list of things that could possibly have been affected in her situation based on the fact that she was a woman, based on the fact that she was female. I feel like she was at the time period that, she was born, she was raised, she was committing her crimes. These time frames were time frames where, yes, women had rights, women had voices, women could vote, things like that. But also, women were still at a point in time where they were not being taken seriously. We still deal with that even today, where women are not taken seriously when they are victimized. But back then, it was so much worse. So I feel like just that in and of itself, just the fact that she was a woman who was trying to take control of her own victimization and drag herself out of a rut of being victimized, or at least that's the way she portrays it, I feel like that has a lot to do with it. I feel like if she was male, or in this case, her brother, had he been in a similar situation, if he had been into, like drugs, for instance, if he had decided to, start selling drugs and get involved with gangs and stuff like that, he would have been taken a little bit more seriously had he had to go to a court trial like this and say, I had to defend myself. I feel like because he is male, he would have had more opportunity to be heard than Aileen based on the fact that she was female.
Okay. Another big thing that I was thinking about was she was saying that it was self-defense in self-defense, but then she claimed that she would kill again. Do you believe it was actually self-defense, or do you believe she just wanted to kill people?
I'm kind of on the fence on how I feel about it, to be completely honest. I feel like if it was really and truly 100% self defense, then she would have come clean about it as soon as she committed the first crime. I feel like she would have said, hey, I killed such and such person because I am a victim of my raising, I am a victim of my childhood and the influences that I had upon me. I was in a situation where I felt it was necessary to prostitute myself to be able to hold my head above water and pay my bills. This person decided they were going to go a little too far in their experience time frame that they had paid for. I accepted payment for that. I'll accept my own faults. I feel like if she came out the first time that she says that she was supposedly assaulted or attempted assaulted and said, hey, this is what happened, At that point, she might have had an opportunity to say this was self-defense. But when you come into, 5, 6, 7 murders of different men and they're all found in similar situations, and one of them was never even found, it starts to make me wonder whether self-defense is appropriate as a claim for this situation.
Which is what I was thinking. Like self-defense, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially since the bodies were partially clothed. Now, I
The
don't,
one guy was naked.
obviously, yeah, one guy was just naked. I personally I've never solicited a prostitute. However, I don't think you get fully naked in a car with them. I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Uh, but it definitely now what might have happened, and this is just a theory that I've concocted in my own head, is she found these men, she was prostituting herself out, and then she would try to rob them, and then part of her things was a sexual crime. So instead of doing it just because she wants to murder them, she wants to basically murder them, groom them, and rob them, if that makes sense.
You do make a really good point there, because if she was as devious as she looks when you watch her documentaries or you watch the movies or read the books and so on and so forth, if she was as devious as people on the outside feel like she was, that she could absolutely have been the type of person that went from, okay, I'm going to sell my body for money so I can make ends meet, to, okay, I'm going to pretend to sell my body for money, and then I'm going to lull these guys into a false sense of security, and then I'm going to take them for everything that they have on them. And then when they fought back, she decided, oh shit, they're going to run their mouth. I'm going to get arrested. Let me just kill this dude.
Yeah, especially with how it seems like everything played out and how she got caught, and especially with a body never being found, that definitely shows a intent of hiding them bodies. But
Which is really
I
strange to
mean,
me.
well,
Why only one out of the number of men that she killed, why only one was the body never recovered?
that's a very good question. This was in the late 90s, so I mean, the police work is not nearly what it is today. So, I mean,
Which
advancements
is
made, but
understandable. It's not like they had as much opportunity to follow leads at that time as they would
yeah,
nowadays. Nowadays, in a situation like Aileen Wuornos, if her case came current in 2024, there was a case like this, every single body would be found. It might take some
yes,
time, but they would find it via trace evidence.
yes, yeah, and that's definitely what it seems like to me. I mean,
Why don't we give a shout out to our listeners and see if they'd like to give us their opinion on what they think happened with Aileen Wuornos? Have you watched any of her movies? Have you watched any documentaries, read any of the books, or watched any of the YouTube videos? Have you heard other podcasts that have given more detail? What do you think? Can you leave it in your comments down below?
right. Yeah, and listeners, if any of these if you have any of these topics that affected you today, please make sure to speak out to a trusted person. There are plenty of resources out there for you. Please do not resort to murdering dudes. It's not cool.
You make a good point. And you know what, Ducky? I'm super excited about our next episode.
How is that?
Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but obviously everybody knows today's episode was a short episode, and our next one is coming way sooner than anyone expects. Like, super, super soon.
Are you trying to create suspense here?
Maybe! But seriously, we'd love to hear what cases our listeners want us to cover. We really want to know what you want to hear about. We've got a little bit of our own list kind of going, and we discuss this on a regular basis. We are friends in real life, so we do have a little bit of a base list, but we really want to know your suggestions on what you'd like for us to cover, how much detail you would like us to go in on the early life of the crime, the whole situation. Do you want detail? Do you want it to be quick, kind of like today's was? What would you like to hear more of our opinions on other topics or related topics like we did today? We would love to have you comment it anywhere that you have the availability to. And we also have an email address that can be added to the descriptions of the episodes. And you can reach us there if you don't feel comfortable leaving a comment.
Absolutely. Just drop all your suggestions in the comment section. We would really like to put out episodes that our listeners want to hear, not just ones that we go through. Because if we don't get comments, we're just going to keep making videos on random crimes that we find interesting. But with that, subscribe, like, and yeah, just tell us what you want to hear.
But just remember, folks, keep it respectful. Every case we're discussing involves real life people.
Yes, these people, real families. But on that note,
I'm Orion.
I'm Ducky, and this has been The Lades After
Delayed
Dark.
After Dark.